Have you ever stepped into a place so silent that the quiet itself began to breathe? West Virginia has forests like that, places where sound doesn't fade, it sinks, swallowed whole by ancient trees and soil too old to care who walks upon it. The canopy was so thick above us that the sky had ceased to exist, replaced by a ceiling of damp green shadow. The fog didn't roll here like weather, it settled, patient and unmoving, as if waiting for us to make a mistake. It was the fourth morning of our expedition when we stumbled onto Cemetery Road, and I swear to you, some roads are better left undiscovered. Our unit consisted of 4. Captain Elias Delaney led the team, a lean man with silver threading through his hair and eyes that calculated every variable before he even spoke. To his right was Sergeant Kyle Bishop, our communications tech, perpetually burdened by the bulky radio pack that kept us tethered to base, or was supposed to. I trailed them, James Ford, Jamie to the squad, recon specialist and designated optimist when morale failed. At the rear was Corporal Lee, medic, quiet as prayer and twice as steady when things went wrong. On paper, our assignment was simple: locate the remnants of an abandoned training camp shut down in the 70s, mark potential hazards, and report back for assessment. Headquarters wanted to know if the land was viable for redevelopment. A procedural recon, routine and uneventful, or so we believed. But the moment our boots crossed that valley line, the world began to feel different. The air turned dense, as though every breath carried weight. By the second day, the fog arrived, thick, cotton-dense, so close you could taste the mineral tang of it on your tongue. Bishop kept staring at his GPS, brow furrowing deeper each time the screen glitched. The coordinates refused to stay still. Delaney said nothing, only adjusted his pack and pushed forward, his rhythm unbroken, like a man marching through his own doubts. I admired that kind of resolve, even when every instinct inside me whispered that something here wanted us gone. We set up camp in a clearing ringed by pines that looked old enough to remember when this continent still belonged to silence. Our fire crackled weakly against the cold damp air, light bending in strange ways as if the trees themselves leaned closer to watch. Lee heated rations while Bishop tried, yet again, to raise base on the radio. Static answered him, endless and heavy, broken by faint bursts that almost sounded like voices before dissolving into nothing. Nothing, he muttered, pulling the headset away. Every frequency's dead. GPS thinks we're moving even when we're not. Delaney's expression didn't change. Mountains mess with signals, he said, but I caught the tightness in his jaw. I didn't tell them what I'd seen an hour earlier, movement pacing us in the fog. Not the skittish dart of wildlife, not the erratic steps of a lost hiker. This was precise, deliberate. Human or something close to it. Shadows sliding parallel to our route but never closing the distance. I told myself fatigue was the culprit, that poor light and nerves make ghosts out of trees. But deep down I recognized the feeling of being watched, the prickle that years of deployments had taught me never to ignore. That night, none of us slept. The forest produced its usual noises, branches creaking, the slow shuffle of nocturnal life, but beneath it all was something unnatural. A faint vibration in the ground, a low hum like the earth exhaling. Lee heard it too. I caught him awake twice, head tilted, listening like a medic trying to diagnose an invisible sickness. Dawn came dull and lifeless, the fog refusing to lift, shifting only enough to reveal more of itself. We broke camp without words. Delaney unfolded his paper map, an old-school habit he trusted more than satellites, and traced a path with his gloved finger. Logging road should intersect our route about 2 miles north, he said. If the camp's where records place it, we'll reach it before midday. We followed. The slope was gradual, soil rich and black, each step releasing the musk of rot and time. It wasn't unpleasant, just insistent, the smell of endings feeding beginnings. After 2 hours of trudging through the endless gray, we found the road, or maybe it found us. One heartbeat we were pushing through undergrowth, the next, we stepped onto asphalt cracked by age, yellow lines still barely visible under moss. A crooked wooden post stood nearby with a rusted sign hanging loose, letters half-worn yet decipherable, Cemetery Road. Bishop let out a humorless laugh. That's not creepy at all. Delaney frowned. Map doesn't list any cemetery in this area. Map doesn't list this road either, I said. Lee crouched, brushing his fingers across the surface. Haven't been maintained in decades, but it's real. Asphalt, not gravel. We stared at it, the 4 of us standing in silence before a path that shouldn't exist. Delaney made the call. We follow it north. Stay sharp. If it leads to the camp, we save ourselves some bushwhacking. So we walked. Our boots made soft, uneven echoes against the ruined pavement. The trees leaned inward, their branches interlocking above, forming a natural tunnel that swallowed daylight. Every few minutes, I caught myself glancing behind, half expecting those shapes in the fog to step into view. That's when I began noticing the details, small things at first, but wrong in their arrangement. A mailbox standing alone with no house behind it. A street lamp base rusted through yet still upright, no wires feeding it. A child's tricycle tipped on its side, sun-bleached plastic faded but intact, as though the owner had just stepped away. "Captain," I called softly, "you seeing this?" He didn't answer right away, only stared ahead. I followed his gaze to a smaller sign nailed to a leaning post, hand-painted letters spelling, "Welcome to Ashford. Population 247. Bishop frowned down at his tablet, now flickering like a dying lantern. No Ashford in this county, no record of one ever. Then who made the sign? Lee asked. No one replied, because the truth was already coiling inside us. We'd crossed into somewhere that wasn't supposed to be on any map. The road curved gently ahead, swallowed by fog. As we rounded it, the shapes emerged, buildings, not ruins but preserved like diorama models. A general store, a post office, a diner with chrome trim dulled by time but still standing. Flags hung limp on rusted poles. A town, silent and waiting. Delaney's hand drifted toward his sidearm but didn't draw. "Spread out," he ordered quietly. "Sweep visually. Nobody goes inside alone." The town stretched no more than a few hundred feet in either direction, 15, maybe 20 buildings aligned on both sides of Cemetery Road, culminating in a church steeple that pierced the fog like a warning finger aimed at heaven. I approached the general store window. Dust clouded the glass, yet inside, shelves still held cans, boxes, even a cash register closed and ready for customers who'd never return. A yellowed calendar hung on the wall, date frozen decades back. Bishop's voice crackled through comms. "You all need to see this." We regrouped by the post office. He stood before a glass-covered bulletin board, its notices faded but legible: bake sales, Sunday services, town meetings, all marked September 1973. Lee opened the door. It swung inward without protest. The scent hit us immediately, not decay, not rot, but paper and ink, the ghost of old correspondence. Stacks of unopened letters filled the room, each one addressed but unsent. Names like Thomas Brennan and Sarah Wickham written in neat cursive, no stamps, no destinations. "This isn't right," Lee murmured. "None of this is right." Delaney turned a postmark stamp over in his hand. September 14, 1973. The same date on every envelope, every flyer, every trace of life here. I drifted into the back room. More mailbags, more letters, all untouched. A desk lay waiting with a pen across an unfinished logbook. On the wall hung a photograph of 3 smiling postal workers, their faces too clear, too recent. The ink hadn't aged. For a moment, I thought one of them blinked. We regrouped outside again, the fog thick as cement now, pressing the air from our lungs. The buildings seemed closer, watching. Delaney's voice was low but sharp. "We document and exfil. This isn't what we came for." Bishop lifted his camera, took the first shot, and that's when we heard it. Footsteps. Rhythmic, measured, coming from somewhere deep in the fog. Not echoes of our own. Something else was marching toward us. At first, we thought it was the wind, some trick of echo through the hollow streets, but then the rhythm sharpened, boots on asphalt, steady and deliberate, closing in from somewhere within the fog. Every instinct I'd ever trusted told me to get low, to disappear, but Delaney raised his hand instead, signaling for silence. We moved as one, forming a defensive semicircle in the middle of Cemetery Road, rifles drawn but fingers trembling on the triggers. The sound grew louder, unmistakable now, a synchronized march, multiple individuals, maybe a dozen. Bishop's voice was a whisper barely louder than breath. Military cadence. I could hear it too, the disciplined precision of trained movement. Shadows began to emerge in the fog, human shapes molded from vapor, their outlines hardening as they drew closer. Then, finally, they stepped into view, soldiers, or the ghosts of them, uniforms faded olive drab, the kind worn half a century ago. Rifles slung over their shoulders, boots striking the pavement in perfect unison. Everything about them said human until you looked at their faces. There weren't any. No eyes, no mouths, no features at all, just smooth, pale skin stretching from hairline to jaw, like wax figures left half-finished. They passed within arm's reach of us, so close I could smell the damp canvas of their packs, the faint rot of old wool. Not one looked our way, not one broke step. They moved past like we weren't there, continuing toward the far end of the street where the church loomed, its steeple swallowed by fog. Lee made a small sound, a strangled gasp. Bishop's camera slipped from his grip and cracked against the pavement. Delaney didn't move. His weapon stayed half-raised, but I could see it in his eyes. He was measuring the impossible, trying to rationalize it with training that had no category for this. The formation vanished into the mist, their footsteps fading until there was nothing left but silence. None of us spoke for a long moment. I could hear my own pulse pounding in my ears, loud enough to mistake for that ghostly cadence returning. "We're leaving," Delaney said finally, voice raw. Now. No one argued. We turned back toward where we'd entered the town, moving at a near jog, but within minutes I realized something had changed. The road was wrong. The curve that had led us in was gone, replaced by an unbroken stretch that extended endlessly forward. Buildings had shifted, rearranged themselves like pieces of a dream. The general store was now where the diner had been, the post office gone entirely. Even the church, once at the far end, now loomed only yards away to our right. "This isn't the same street," I said, more to myself than anyone else. Bishop checked his GPS, eyes wide. "Coordinates are looping, 3 separate locations flickering at once." "That's impossible." Delaney's jaw clenched. "Nothing's impossible until we've run out of explanations. Keep moving." But his tone betrayed him. We were no longer mapping terrain, the terrain was mapping us. The fog closed in tighter, swallowing the edges of the world. The sound returned, footsteps again, but scattered now, surrounding us, overlapping until direction meant nothing. It was like being in the center of a parade ground filled with invisible ranks, all marching to a rhythm only they could hear. The air itself felt charged, humming against the skin. Shapes moved between the buildings, vague and shifting. Curtains stirred in upper windows where no life should be. Lee's breathing grew ragged, his whispered prayers bleeding into the static of the comms. "We're being herded," Bishop said suddenly. He wasn't wrong. Every path we took curved us closer to the church, no matter which direction we turned. Even when we doubled back, the fog rearranged the streets behind us, sealing the way. We hit a fork, one road straight, the other veering right into thicker mist. Delaney hesitated only a second before pointing right. "This way." We followed without question because questioning didn't matter anymore. The world was no longer obeying the rules we lived by. The new path wound between unfamiliar buildings, a red brick schoolhouse, a barber shop, a hardware store whose window displayed tools gleaming like they'd just been polished. None of these structures had existed moments earlier. I felt it then, the realization crawling up my spine like a slow cold hand. This town wasn't decaying. It was preserved, held in perfect suspension, as if something refused to let it die. Cemetery Road. The name suddenly took on its truest meaning. This wasn't a settlement, it was a grave still breathing. The schoolhouse towered 3 stories high, its windows reflecting only fog. Delaney stopped, gaze fixed on it. "Hold here," he said quietly. His voice was steady again, the captain returning through the fear. Bishop leaned against a lamppost, sucking air through clenched teeth. Lee checked his watch, frowned, then tapped the glass like he could shake the truth loose. 1847, he said. "Hasn't moved for almost an hour." I glanced at mine. Same. The second hand twitched, then snapped back, repeating over and over, a time caught in eternal stutter. Delaney pulled out his compass, watched the needle spin lazy circles. "Magnetic interference," he murmured, though the words lacked conviction. "What kind of interference freezes time?" That was when we heard it, the singing. High, delicate voices drifting from somewhere inside the schoolhouse. Children's voices, faint and sweet, carrying through the fog like a lullaby bleeding from a radio underwater. I couldn't make out the words, but the melody lodged itself instantly in my skull. It was old-fashioned, innocent in tone, and yet it filled me with a dread deeper than any firefight I'd survived. Bishop's voice broke the spell. "We should keep moving. Whatever's in there, we don't need to find out." But Delaney was staring at the open double doors at the top of the steps, his expression unreadable. "If this place is what I think it is," he said, "we need to understand it. Knowledge is our only weapon." Lee shook his head. "Sir, that's an order," Delaney snapped, his control cracking just enough to show the strain underneath. 5 minutes. Quick sweep. Stay together. We climbed the steps, boots echoing too loud against the stone. The singing grew clearer, impossibly calm. Inside, the hall stretched long and dim, lockers lining both walls, paint peeling in thin curls. The smell hit first: chalk dust, floor wax, faint mildew. It was the exact scent of every school I'd ever walked into, and somehow that familiarity made it worse. We followed the sound toward a stairwell. Each creak of the steps felt like the building acknowledging us. At the landing, light glowed at the end of the hall, a warm yellow spilling from a single classroom. The song came from there, voices rising and falling in perfect unison. We approached in formation, rifles up. Delaney reached the doorway first, glanced inside, and froze. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. I leaned past him, and the sight burned itself into memory. The classroom was full. Dozens of children sat at their desks, hands folded, eyes forward. Their clothes were clean, pressed, their posture impeccable. But like the soldiers, their faces were smooth, featureless planes of flesh. At the front of the room stood a woman in a long dress and cardigan, conducting their singing with slow, graceful gestures. She too was faceless. On the blackboard behind her, written in pristine cursive, September 14, 1973. Lee made a strangled noise, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Bishop backed into the wall, whispering, "No. This isn't real. This can't be real." The song stopped. Every child froze mid-note, head still tilted upward toward the board. Then, in perfect synchrony, every one of them turned toward the door. Toward us. The faceless teacher's hand lowered, and the silence that followed felt alive. "Move," Delaney ordered through clenched teeth. We didn't argue. We ran. Down the hallway, down the stairs, boots hammering the floor with a panic that turned to rhythm, the same rhythm we'd heard from the faceless soldiers. Behind us came the sound of chairs scraping, of feet, small, countless feet, moving in perfect step. And then the singing began again, louder now, triumphant, chasing us through the echoing halls of that dead school. We burst into the fog, gasping, running blindly past the hardware store, past the diner, the town folding in around us, reshaping itself as we fled. Windows blinked open like eyes, doors gaped like mouths. Somewhere behind us, that melody kept rising, filling the mist with something almost joyful, a celebration for the damned. We didn't stop running until our lungs burned and our legs threatened to give out. When Delaney finally motioned to halt, we stumbled into what looked like the general store again, or something pretending to be it. Same sign above the door, same display window, but the details were wrong. The advertisements on the glass had changed, the lettering sharper, fresher, like the paint hadn't aged a day. Inside, the shelves were restocked, the dust gone. I couldn't tell if we'd looped back or stepped into a different version of the same place. Either way, the fog pressed so tightly against the windows it felt solid, like the world outside had been erased entirely. Delaney didn't hesitate. He kicked the door open, and we rushed in, barricading it behind us with whatever furniture we could drag. The sound of the singing still lingered beyond the walls, faint now, but constant, like the town itself was breathing in harmony. For several minutes, the only thing that existed was the sound of our ragged breathing. Bishop's hands shook so hard he nearly dropped his rifle. Lee crouched beside him, checking his nose, still bloodied from his earlier fall. "We're trapped," Bishop finally muttered, voice trembling. "This place won't let us leave." No one corrected him. Delaney paced near the window, jaw tight, eyes darting between the fog and his wristwatch, which was still frozen at 1847. His control was fraying around the edges, but he refused to let it show. "We rest, regroup, and reassess," he said. "No one panics until I say so." But panic was already creeping in, the silent kind that tightens every muscle in your chest until breathing feels like work. Lee opened his med kit, hands trembling as he took inventory. 2 days' worth of supplies if we ration. Water's low. "Food's not an issue," I said, glancing at the shelves lined with canned goods. "Place is fully stocked." Bishop shot me a look, his face pale and drawn. "You want to eat something from this town? Be my guest." He wasn't wrong. Every can, every box on those shelves was dated September 1973. Every label pristine, every expiration long past yet untouched by decay. It was as if the town had been sealed in amber, everything frozen in the moment before whatever horror struck. Delaney began moving through the store, checking each object like it might explain itself. He opened the cash register. Inside were bills printed in 1973, crisp as new. A stack of newspapers near the counter caught his eye. September 14, 1973, the headline read, though the print had faded too much to reveal the story beneath. Everything stops that day, Delaney murmured. Something happened here. Something big. Or something started, Lee said quietly. The singing outside shifted, lower now, deeper, an adult chorus. Through the front window, faint light flickered in the fog. Dozens of small points glowing in unison. Candles, or something pretending to be them. They burned in the direction of the church. Bishop pressed closer to the glass, voice barely above a whisper. They're gathering. The fog pulsed with movement, figures drifting through it like shadows underwater, all converging toward that steeple. We wait until dark, Delaney said. Then we go to the church. Lee stared at him, disbelief cutting through exhaustion. Sir, you want to go toward them? The church is the center, Delaney replied. Whatever happened here started there. That's our way out, or our only chance to understand this. I wanted to argue, to suggest literally anything else, but deep down I knew he was right. The church had been watching us since the moment we arrived, appearing and disappearing through the fog like a heartbeat. It was the anchor, the pulse of this impossible place. If we're going to die, Bishop muttered, might as well do it at the source. We settled into uneasy silence, taking turns at the window while the others rested. The fog outside glowed faintly from those candle-like lights. The song continued without pause, wordless but layered, swelling and fading like waves. Every so often, I thought I heard something else woven beneath it, footsteps marching in time, doors opening and closing, whispers that almost formed words before dissolving again. The town wasn't empty, it was awake, and we were the intruders keeping it company. At some point, Bishop got the radio working, just barely. Static roared through the speaker, but under it, a voice cracked through, faint and distant. Echo team, respond. What's your position? Bishop lunged for the mic. This is Bishop. We're in a town called Ashford. Coordinates unknown. Requesting immediate extraction. The reply came after a long pause, distorted and hollow. No record of Ashford in your sector. Repeat, state actual position. We're on Cemetery Road. Bishop shouted, desperation creeping into his tone. We found, the signal cut. Not faded. Vanished. Bishop twisted knobs, switched frequencies, checked the antenna. Nothing. The hum returned, soft, resonant, almost like laughter buried in static. He slammed the unit shut, face crumpling. It's gone. It's all gone. Lee sat back against a shelf, rubbing his eyes. So, what now? We wait until they come for us. We wait for night, Delaney said again. His voice sounded like gravel now, worn but unshakable. Then we move. I drifted toward the back of the store to clear my head, flashlight sweeping across rows of preserved goods and empty space. There was a door slightly ajar, leading into storage. Inside, the air felt colder, heavier. I found a calendar pinned to the wall. Every day up to September 13th was crossed out in red marker. September 14th circled over and over until the ink had bled through the paper. Beneath it, a shaky message scrawled in thick letters, "They're coming for us." My stomach dropped. I carried it to Delaney, who studied it in silence, his expression hardening. They knew it was coming, he said at last. They just didn't know what it was. Maybe they tried to stop it, Bishop murmured from the corner. And failed. Maybe they're still trying. The idea sat in the air like a weight none of us wanted to acknowledge. Outside, the singing grew louder, the notes bending unnaturally, as if the melody itself was being stretched by invisible hands. The fog pulsed in rhythm, glowing faintly gold now. The town was alive, its heart beating faster. Delaney checked his weapon, then nodded once. 5 minutes. Pack up. We move on my signal. Lee looked terrified, but he didn't argue. Bishop reassembled his radio one last time, slinging it over his shoulder despite knowing it was useless. I loaded a fresh magazine, though I doubted bullets could hurt anything that existed only halfway in reality. The air grew still, too still. Even the song paused, a silence so absolute it felt predatory. Then came the shift, the fog parting just enough to reveal the street outside. A line of figures stood there, perfectly still, shoulder to shoulder, stretching in both directions. Hundreds of them, men, women, children, all faceless, all dressed in clothing from another era. Between them lay a clear path leading straight to the church doors, lit by those flickering candle lights. It looked like a procession waiting for us to join. Delaney exhaled once, steadying himself. We move. We stepped outside, the fog swallowing us whole. The moment our boots hit the pavement, the singing stopped again. The silence pressed down, so dense it felt like the air itself had weight. The faceless crowd didn't move, didn't reach, didn't breathe. They simply waited, head slightly tilted as if listening to something we couldn't hear. We advanced down the path they'd left open, rifles raised, eyes flicking from shadow to shadow. The church loomed ahead, its doors yawning wide, spilling faint light and a smell of old incense. Halfway there, a figure stepped out from the line of onlookers. He was taller than the rest, wearing a Vietnam-era officer's uniform, ribbons dull with age. He stopped directly in our path, unmoving. Delaney raised his rifle. "Step aside." The figure didn't respond. I said, "Move." The air trembled. Then, behind the officer, the faceless soldiers appeared again, those same marching phantoms from earlier, forming ranks across the street, sealing the path to the church. They didn't lift their weapons, but they didn't have to. The message was clear: we weren't invited, we were being kept. Lee's voice cracked in terror. "They're not letting us through." Delaney's jaw tightened. "Then we go through them." And with that, he took the first step forward. The officer's faceless head tilted slightly, as though listening to something we couldn't hear. Delaney raised his rifle higher, stepping forward through the mist. "Move aside," he ordered, voice flat but heavy with strain. When the figure didn't react, he barked it again, louder, "Move." And that's when the air broke. The officer's hand shot out fast as a snake, clamping around Delaney's wrist. The sound that tore from the captain's throat was not human, it was shock and agony compressed into a single breath. His skin paled instantly, color draining like water down a sink. I saw his fingers stiffen, his rifle slipping free as though his muscles had forgotten they existed. "Contact!" I yelled, opening fire. My rounds punched through the soldier's chest, but the holes closed almost instantly, sealing as if the mist itself was stitching them back together. Lee screamed something I didn't catch. Bishop charged forward trying to pull Delaney free, and the world erupted into chaos. The faceless ranks surged forward, hands reaching, their formation breaking into a tide of bodies. When they touched flesh, they didn't bruise or tear, they erased. Wherever their fingers brushed skin, it went gray and smooth, drained of texture and humanity. Bishop managed to grab Delaney's arm and yank him backward, but the captain's face, God, his face, was already changing, the lines blurring, mouth vanishing into blank skin. He looked at me, eyes wide with a terror that went beyond pain, and then the crowd engulfed him. We fired until our magazines clicked dry, until the fog lit with muzzle flashes and gun smoke mixed with something sweet and rotten. Bullets tore through them, but they didn't fall, they only shuddered and reformed, like shadows pretending to be men. Bishop disappeared next, pulled under by grasping hands. His scream cut short as his features melted away mid-shout, his mouth sealing over in silence. "Fall back," Lee shouted, his voice breaking. I grabbed his shoulder, dragging him as we retreated through the fog. The world had collapsed into white noise and shadows, that humming returning, deep, resonant, vibrating through bone. The church's doors yawned open ahead, its light pulsing brighter, almost calling to us, and every instinct screamed that going inside meant surrendering completely. We veered away, running into the maze of shifting streets. Behind us, the faceless soldiers stopped their pursuit. The singing returned, rising in volume, no longer mournful but victorious, a hymn for the captured. We ran until our lungs begged for mercy, until the sound faded into distant echoes. The fog grew denser, streets looping and twisting, buildings rearranging like chess pieces between one blink and the next. When we finally stopped, the silence was worse than the noise. Lee collapsed against a fence, gasping. His hands shook uncontrollably as he reloaded his pistol. "They took them," he rasped. "Delaney, Bishop, they're gone." I didn't answer. I could still see the way Delaney's features vanished, like his very self had been rewritten into nothingness. The fog pressed close, whispering with faint static. I forced myself to move, scanning the surroundings. We were on a residential street now, houses lined in perfect rows, each porch light glowing dimly despite no visible power. Curtains swayed behind windows. The air smelled of dust and something faintly metallic, like blood on cold steel. "We can't stop," I said. "We keep moving." Lee nodded, though his eyes were glassy with shock. Every path we took curved subtly, bending us back toward the church. It was like the entire town existed on a tilt, sliding everything toward that center. "We're rats in a maze," Lee muttered, his voice cracking. "It's hurting us. Then maybe we run against it." I tried turning down an alley between two houses, but it bent sharply, rejoining the same street we'd just left. I cursed under my breath. The geometry made no sense, angles folding into themselves, distances shrinking, stretching. The more we fought the layout, the tighter the town coiled around us. The fog began to glow faintly again, that same sickly golden hue. From somewhere nearby came faint laughter, childlike, echoing through the mist. We froze, weapons up. "You hear that?" I whispered. "Yeah," Lee said, "and I wish I didn't." The laughter faded, replaced by whispers. They came from everywhere at once, male and female voices, words slurred, distorted, overlapping like a broken radio picking up multiple channels. My name drifted through them once, soft, intimate, and wrong. I turned sharply, sweeping my rifle through the fog. Nothing there. "They know us," I said, voice barely steady. "They shouldn't," Lee replied. "But they do." We pressed on, choosing direction at random, because direction no longer mattered. The air was colder now, breath misting in front of us. Every sound we made came back distorted, as though the fog itself was mimicking us half a second late. Finally, we reached what looked like a small park, benches, a rusted swing set, and a fountain dry except for a shallow pool of water reflecting nothing but fog. Lee knelt by the edge, wiping sweat from his face. "I can't," he started, then froze. I followed his gaze. The reflection in the water wasn't us. It showed the same park, same fountain, but two faceless figures kneeling where we were, their heads turning slowly upward. I yanked him back, and the reflection shattered, rippling until it became nothing but cloudy water again. "We're leaving," I said, my throat dry. "Now." We stumbled back toward the road, disoriented. That's when the humming started again, louder this time, vibrating through the soles of our boots. The fog pulsed with it, rhythm steady, almost mechanical. A light flickered through the mist ahead, drawing our eyes, a lamppost still standing, its bulb glowing weakly. Underneath it sat a single figure, motionless, facing away. Civilian clothes, shoulders trembling like someone quietly sobbing. Lee took a hesitant step forward. "Hello?" he called. "Are you?" The figure turned its head, and both of us froze. It had a face, eyes, mouth, nose, all there, but wrong. The features moved independently, eyes rolling, mouth twitching, as if it couldn't remember how to use them. It smiled, an expression that felt borrowed, and whispered, "You shouldn't have come." Then it dissolved into fog, leaving behind only a faint echo of the words, repeating like a recording skipping on loop. "You shouldn't have come. You shouldn't have come." Lee was shaking. "We're dead," he said flatly. "We just haven't caught up to it yet." I gripped his shoulder hard enough to make him flinch. "We're not dead. Not yet." "Then what are we?" he asked. I didn't answer, because maybe he was right. Maybe this place had killed us already, and all that was left were echoes still trying to finish the mission. The singing rose again, close this time, adult voices now, deep and resonant, the same hymn we'd heard before. The fog ahead began to glow brighter. I could see the outline of the church steeple re-emerging, impossibly near no matter how far we'd run. "It's pulling us back," I said. "Every road leads here." Lee swallowed hard. "Then maybe that's where the heart is." The words hung between us. Maybe the only way out was through. But as we stood there, surrounded by fog that breathed and whispered our names, I couldn't shake the feeling that crossing that threshold meant surrendering whatever fragments of ourselves still belonged to the world outside. Still, as the hymn swelled louder and the earth hummed beneath our boots, there was nowhere left to go but forward. The closer we moved toward the church, the more the world began to bend. The fog thickened into a visible current, swirling around our legs like water. The air hummed, low, rhythmic, mechanical, vibrating through our bones. It wasn't just sound, it was pressure, the kind that makes your teeth ache and your heart stutter. The church towered above us, larger than it had any right to be. Its spire stabbed through the mist like a black needle, and the stained glass windows glowed faintly from within, pulsing in time with that impossible heartbeat beneath the ground. Hundreds of candles flickered behind those windows, their light shifting like something was moving just beyond sight. We crouched behind a crumbling stone wall, staring up at the massive wooden doors. From here, we could see the faint silhouettes of the faceless congregation inside, hundreds of them standing shoulder to shoulder, motionless, swaying slightly in rhythm to the hymn that never stopped. Lee swallowed hard. "She said the basement," he murmured. "Side door, pastor's entrance." I nodded, scanning the building's perimeter. Margaret's directions had been clear: avoid the main hall, avoid the congregation, go beneath. The side entrance was half hidden behind overgrown shrubs, the door cracked open like it had been waiting for decades for someone to walk through. The fog seemed to thin there, just enough to reveal the outline of narrow steps leading down into darkness. Lee looked at me. You trust her? I shook my head. No, but we're out of other options. We moved quickly, keeping low, rifles raised though the gesture felt like pretending at safety. The door creaked when Lee pushed it open, the sound splitting the hum for a single breath before the fog swallowed it. The stairwell beyond descended steeply, lit by the weak flicker of emergency bulbs that shouldn't have had power after 51 years. The air grew colder with each step, heavy with the scent of ozone and burnt metal. By the time we reached the bottom, the humming was no longer ambient, it was physical, thrumming through the concrete floor beneath our boots. The basement was massive, far larger than the footprint of the church above. Cables snaked across the floor and walls like veins, converging on something in the center of the room. The machine. It stood almost 10 feet tall, a twisted hybrid of metal, glass, and something organic. It pulsed faintly, breathing light through its transparent chambers. Tubes filled with cloudy fluid rose from its sides, connecting to shapes that at first I thought were statues, but they weren't. They were people. A dozen of them, arranged in a circle around the device, wearing uniforms and lab coats, their faces long since erased. They stood upright, motionless, their hands pressed flat against the machine as though feeding it with whatever fragments of self they had left. Lee froze. Jesus Christ, he whispered. They never left. I couldn't answer. The truth of it hit me like a physical blow. These were the researchers, the soldiers who had come before us, trapped in perpetual servitude to the thing they'd created. Their skin shimmered faintly, pulsing in sync with the machine's glow. Whatever it was alive, and it was using them to stay that way. The hum changed pitch. The faceless bodies stirred, turning toward us in eerie unison. Their mouths opened, not to breathe, but to sing. The same hymn we'd heard all night erupted from them, deafening in the confined space. The machine flared brighter, its inner chambers flickering like a heart struggling to beat. We have to end it now, I yelled. Lee pulled a thermite grenade from his pack, the last explosive we had left. I took aim at the device's core and opened fire. Rounds sparked off metal, shattering glass tubes, spilling viscous fluid that steamed where it touched the floor. The faceless surged forward, reaching for us. Their touch was ice and static, draining strength from every nerve they brushed. Lee tore the pin from the grenade and hurled it at the machine. It stuck to the side, igniting in a blinding flare of white fire. The room filled with smoke and screaming, not human, not mechanical, something in between. The sound burrowed into my skull, twisting the world around me. I felt the cold grip of a faceless hand on my arm, burning through my sleeve, and for an instant, the fog behind my eyes flickered with images, faces, families, 1,000 voices calling for release. Lee was down, 3 of them pinning him to the floor. His face was already starting to blur. I fired until my rifle clicked empty, then drew my sidearm and emptied that too. The thermite burned through the machine's core, melting its heart. Sparks exploded in every direction, and the light inside began to collapse inward, shrinking to a single point before erupting in a violent burst of energy. The shockwave threw me backward. When I hit the ground, my ears were ringing and the world was shaking. The faceless collapsed mid-movement, their bodies falling like marionettes with cut strings. The humming stopped. For the first time since entering the valley, silence returned, pure, deafening silence. I crawled to Lee. He was conscious, but barely. His features flickered between human and blank, like the fog itself couldn't decide whether to erase him or let him stay. Stay with me, I whispered. It's over. But the church above was groaning, the walls fracturing as 51 years of decay crashed back into reality all at once. I could hear them above us, the congregation crying out, not in song but in something that sounded like freedom and agony intertwined. The fog began to break apart, beams of moonlight cutting through as the structure above collapsed. I dragged Lee toward the stairs, both of us half blind from the light. Behind us, the machine's glow sputtered once more, then died completely. The last thing I heard before the world went quiet was the echo of voices fading into the air, hundreds of them whispering a single word. Free. The church was collapsing by the time we reached the stairs. Every surface trembled as if the ground itself had finally decided to exhale after half a century of holding its breath. The noise was unbearable, wood splintering, glass shattering, the low groan of stone shifting under impossible pressure. I half-dragged, half-carried Lee toward the door, my ears still ringing from the explosion below. The air was thick with dust and smoke, the remnants of the machine's fire burning white in my vision. Somewhere above us, the great bell in the steeple let out a hollow clang that seemed to echo through the bones of the world. We burst through the side door and stumbled into the open fog. But it wasn't the same fog we'd walked into. It was thinning, breaking apart into tatters like smoke losing its shape. For the first time in days, I could see real sky through the gaps, dark, starless, infinite. Behind us, the church folded in on itself like paper burning from the inside out. I turned just in time to see the roof cave, flames licking upward before vanishing into the mist. The hymn that had haunted us since we arrived warped into something else, voices crying, laughing, weeping, all dissolving as the structure imploded. Then silence. Pure, absolute. The town of Ashford stood around us, or what remained of it. Buildings shimmered as though submerged underwater, their outlines flickering in and out. The general store, the post office, the diner, all transparent, dissolving into the air like memories finally allowed to fade. The road beneath our boots cracked and split, asphalt breaking apart into soil. Lee lay against the fence line, barely conscious, face pale but human again. The blur that had begun to erase him was gone. I dropped beside him, pulling his head into my lap. "You still with me?" I asked. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "What happened?" "We ended it," I said. "At least, I think we did." He looked around, dazed. "Where's everyone?" I didn't have an answer. The town was vanishing piece by piece, the fog unraveling as the last remnants of the machine's power drained away. Movement drew my eyes toward the houses across the street. Margaret stood on her porch, exactly as we'd left her. She was watching the sky, the photograph she'd shown us still clutched in her hand. When she turned, she smiled, not in fear or sorrow this time, but peace. She raised a trembling hand in farewell. I started to call out, but before I could, her body shimmered, edges softening until she became light and air. Then she was gone, just like the rest of them. All around us, the townspeople faded one by one, the faceless soldiers, the children, the congregation, all flickering into nothing as the spell that bound them broke. For a moment, I thought I could hear them, voices layered together, whispering their gratitude in tones too faint to understand. Then even that faded. The fog was gone by dawn. Real fog remained, the kind that belongs to the mountains, but the supernatural pall that had wrapped this place was dead. Ashford itself had ceased to exist. In its place was forest, untouched and whole, the way it must have been before the military turned it into an experiment. The road beneath us was no longer asphalt, just soil and moss. I found what little remained of our equipment scattered nearby: Bishop's camera, cracked and burned; Delaney's compass, frozen mid-spin. I held it for a long time, staring at its unmoving needle. There was something cruelly poetic about that. The compass had been spinning for hours, and now, when everything was over, it pointed nowhere. We walked for what felt like hours before we reached the ridge. The forest looked alive again. The light felt real. Birds called faintly through the trees, a sound so ordinary it almost brought me to tears. When Lee managed to get the radio working, his voice shook as he transmitted the emergency code. Static hissed, then a voice answered, clear, human, solid. "Echo team, copy your signal. Where the hell have you been? You've been off comms for 3 days. 3 days. The words didn't make sense. We'd been in Ashford for weeks. Just get us out, I said. When the extraction team found us that afternoon, they barely recognized what was left. We were frostbitten, dehydrated, and half delirious. They said the valley we described didn't exist. The map showed nothing but forest, no town, no road, not even ruins. We were taken back to base and debriefed for 72 hours straight. Every question was the same: what did you see? What happened to the others? I told them the truth, or at least what truth I could manage. They wrote it all down, nodding but never believing. When I mentioned Ashford, their expressions changed. Someone left the room. Someone else came in wearing a different badge. They told me the old military test site in that region had been decommissioned in September 1973 after an incident. No details. No survivors. I showed them the compass, the camera, the evidence. They took it all. A week later, Lee and I were given medical discharges: psychological trauma, fatigue, hallucination due to exposure. They called us lucky to be alive. We didn't feel lucky. That first night outside the base, I woke to find Lee sitting on the motel balcony, staring at the tree line. "You hear it?" he asked quietly. I listened. Nothing but crickets and wind. "No," I said. "Not anymore." He nodded, eyes distant. "Sometimes I do. Just a hum. Barely there." He didn't say it, but I knew what he meant. The same sound that had haunted us in that valley, the sound of the earth breathing, the sound of the machine that should have died. I've tried to move on, tried to forget. But some nights, when fog rolls low across the hills and the wind falls still, I can feel the pull again, that invisible gravity drawing my thoughts back to the valley that no longer exists. Ashford is gone, erased from maps and memory, but the silence it left behind feels alive. A silence that waits. It's been months since they discharged us, but I still wake up at 1847. Every night. No matter when I fall asleep, I always open my eyes to that exact time, the red glow of the digits frozen for a few breaths before they start ticking again. I tell myself it's coincidence, a leftover scar from everything we endured. But deep down, I know better. Time doesn't just let go of places like Ashford. It clings to you, threads itself into your pulse until it becomes a part of you. Lee and I barely talk now. We tried, for a while, weekly calls, therapy sessions, the quiet rituals soldiers invent to convince themselves they've outrun the ghosts. But our words started looping, like static-filled transmissions echoing across a dead channel. "Do you still hear it?" he asked the last time we spoke. "Sometimes," I said. It was a lie. "I hear it every night, the faint hum, buried under the silence. The sound of a machine that should not exist. The sound of a place that refused to die. They told us to forget it. Focus on recovery," the doctors said. "Ground yourself in the present." Easy advice when you haven't watched time collapse in on itself. I tried to take their suggestions, long walks, coffee at sunrise, quiet music, but every little thing keeps pulling me back. The way fog curls over the hills at dawn. The way radio static sounds just before a station locks in. Even the flicker of streetlights feels too much like Ashford's glow. Sometimes, I think the town didn't vanish, it just buried itself under the skin of the world, waiting for the right frequency to breathe again. I've gone through every piece of evidence I managed to hide before they confiscated the rest. Delaney's compass sits on my desk, its needle still dead, frozen in mid-spin. I keep it under a glass case now, though I sometimes catch it vibrating faintly, as if sensing movement somewhere I can't see. Bishop's camera didn't survive the fire, but the memory card did. Most of it's corrupted, static, warped frames, colors bleeding, but one image still loads, a street sign half buried in fog. Cemetery Road. In the far corner of the picture, if you stare long enough, there's a figure, a silhouette of a man standing perfectly still. The metadata says the photo was taken hours after Bishop died. I showed it to Lee once, and he went pale. "That's not possible," he said. "Bishop was gone before we left the church." We both stared at the image, neither of us speaking. Eventually, he walked away without another word. I think he knew what I was starting to realize, that Ashford wasn't just a place in space, but a fracture in time itself. And fractures don't heal, they spread. The military closed the file within weeks. No conclusive evidence, they said. Topographic inconsistencies, equipment malfunction, psychological stress. They scrubbed the valley from every map and sealed the report behind classification codes that will outlive all of us. But I know what I saw. I know what we destroyed, or tried to, and I know that kind of power doesn't just end. Something was being tested in those mountains back in 1973, something that bent physics until it screamed. Whatever they activated didn't just swallow Ashford, it rewrote it, looping a single day over and over until reality itself gave up. When we destroyed the machine, we didn't erase that energy, we released it. There are nights when I drive just to clear my head, following backroads through West Virginia until the world goes quiet. Once, I took a wrong turn. The road narrowed, twisting between pines, and for a moment, I thought I saw it, the faint outline of asphalt where there shouldn't be any, a cracked signpost leaning in the dark. I slammed the brakes before I could read the name, heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. I turned the car around and didn't stop until I saw the highway lights again. But I've been thinking about that night more and more lately, whether it was real, or whether Ashford is calling me back. I still dream about it, always the same sequence. I'm standing in the fog, the air humming low. Ahead of me, the church doors glow faintly, and through the cracks, I can see faces, not blank now, but clear, alive. Delaney, Bishop, Margaret, even the children from the classroom. They're all standing there, watching. Their mouths open in unison, but no sound comes out, just the hum. And then I wake up. 1847, always 1847. Some nights, I go out onto the porch and sit with the compass, watching it under the moonlight. It doesn't spin anymore, but sometimes, I feel it twitch, just once, like a heartbeat. I tell myself that means it's over, that we broke the loop, that those souls finally found rest. But the truth keeps gnawing at me. What if the loop didn't die? What if it just moved? What if we're the new anchors holding it open? Lee once said that time feels wrong now, like the days don't pass evenly, like the air itself forgets to move. I told him he was imagining it, but the truth is, I feel it too. So I'm writing this down, not as a confession, not as a warning, but as proof. Proof that the town existed. Proof that what happened on Cemetery Road wasn't madness or myth. Because someday, someone else will stumble into the fog. Someone else will hear the hum. When that happens, maybe they'll find this record. Maybe they'll know to turn back before it's too late. But if you're reading this and it's already too late, if you're standing in a valley where the trees muffle every sound and the fog doesn't move, then listen to me carefully. Don't look for the road. Don't search for Ashford. Some towns aren't lost because they were forgotten. They're lost because they were meant to stay buried. If you see a sign for Cemetery Road, don't take it. Don't even slow down. Just drive until the fog disappears and time starts ticking again. And if, by chance, you hear singing, soft, distant, sweet as a child's lullaby, pray it's just the wind. Because once you hear it, once you feel the hum beneath your feet, it already knows your name.